All right, so this is something that I really wanted to talk about, especially with the last couple weeks resulting in a couple exits for some teams and their star centers. I think it's important to talk about because of what the NBA and the Final Four of this current 2021 playoff run. These Final Four teams have a little bit in common, and even some other teams that didn't make it here to the conference finals, they have been displaying this as well, especially during the playoffs. So I wanted to talk about this because it's important. I want to get some thoughts on it. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I'm going to be making a lot more of these videos in the future. All right, so I wanted to talk about these centers in the NBA. They've come under a lot of scrutiny lately, and I want to really break down kind of these three centers here that were in the playoffs. And I don't. Is it a question that these are the best three centers in the playoffs? I know people are going to give me a lot of pushback on maybe Bam, but again, they didn't win a game in the series against Milwaukee. He wasn't great for some of those. A lot of people are criticizing him for needing to expand his offensive game a little bit more. DeAndre Ayton has been very surprising, as far as his play goes in the playoffs here with the Suns in their first few series. And so, I mean, I can understand that. But I want to talk about these three because these three are the ones that come under a lot of criticism. And let's start by talking and addressing Nikola Jokic. So Jokic goes and wins the MVP this year. He has a great year. Obviously, they lost Jamal Murray towards the end of the season, and that was devastating to this Nuggets team. Probably put a cap on what they could do in the playoffs. But I want to mention, he goes in the first round, plays very well against plays really well against Portland, and then they get swept by the Suns. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't know if you are the MVP of the league, you should be getting swept. It doesn't really make too much sense to me. I understand there's injuries. I understand that maybe they're not as deep, and that even though Aaron Gordon was a great acquisition for them, he's not necessarily the offensive he's not an offensive player and plays a lot more in the full court and in transition. So Jokic goes under some fire. A lot of people criticize him. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think he's the worst or anything like that. I just am here to kind of say what a lot of people are saying. Jokic is, how far can you go with Jokic as your best player? And how far can you go with a center kind of being the guy that you're running your offense through? As much as we all love Jamal Murray, he's not necessarily a point guard in the sense of being able to rack up a bunch of assists. I think he has games where he does go off in that regard, but for the most part, he is more of a scorer. I think everybody can acknowledge that, right? I mean, he's a better scorer than he is a floor general, and so I mean, but is this team have kind of a ceiling as to like if there's a guy on the perimeter? Now, Jokic also is not a good defensive player. He is extreme. You are scoring against Jokic more times than not. I mean, he's a very below average defender in that regard. You go look at his defensive field goal percentage. I believe it's 53%, and so it is extremely surprising to hear people kind of say, "Oh, we'll hide him on defense" or anything like that. I mean, I don't think you have to. I think if your best player is really a defensive liability, that really kills you. So that's just my personal opinion. I'm not going to sit here and say Jokic is overrated or anything like that. I'm just mentioning kind of what goes on in the NBA. Let's move on to Rudy Gobert, who's next, and he's been coming under fire here with the Jazz exit. After losing 4 straight to the Clippers, after the Clippers used their 5-out offense to really neutralize Rudy Gobert. What is interesting to me is that Rudy is never in his, I don't even know how many years it's been that he's been in the league, but more than 5? I mean, definitely more than 5 that he's been good or startable, right? Center. Never in that time has he been able to really create any offense on his own. Now, I'm not expecting him to be Joel Embiid. I'm not expecting him to pass out of the post like Jokic. But I do feel like there should be some core things that you can do inside. I don't even know if Rudy has the finishing ability of, this older version of Dwight Howard or, JaVale McGee last season. I don't see it enough. He doesn't have a soft touch around the basket. It's a little awkward. He's a very awkward offensive player. That definitely will be the benefit of, rolling on pick and rolls and getting set up for lobs. So, and then, obviously with the playoffs and having to face the 5 out, I mean, he's the league's best interior defender, but when you put him out on an island, it's just not going to work. So he's come under fire. Quickly, let's talk about Embiid. Embiid's a little different because we see he has all the talent in the world, but again, is he too much of the offense for, like, can he be the offensive centerpiece for a championship winning team? Or does it come somewhere else? And I don't know. When you're in a tough series, can you throw it down in the post to him and kind of just take a 50-50 game? Or can you be able to have a guy on the perimeter that can score in the mid-range or whatever it may be? Embiid has injury history as well. For all the talent in the world, it seems like he gets injured every playoff run, and it's a concern. So the reason I'm mentioning all these things is that are we hyping up the center position too much? Is this becoming a thing where we are starting to get a little I think it's getting overblown. I mean, Jokic is the MVP, Rudy is the defensive player of the year, Embiid's kind of widely known as the best center in the league right now. I know some people will take Jokic. It's a toss up for me, honestly. But I want to look at these the builds of some of these rosters that are continuing to play in this playoffs. Let's start with the Hawks. So they, again, in the playoffs, I understand that you're going to cut your rotation to 8 or 9. And so it maybe not, you don't get representation from every position in a sense, but the Hawks play Capella, and he has been great for them as far as how he's played on defense this year. But after that, they don't really go to another center off the bench. Likewise, Milwaukee doesn't really go to another center off the bench. Plus, their center has the ability to stretch out and hit occasional threes. The Clippers and the Suns. Let's talk about the Suns first on that one. So the Suns, again, they have a center who was a top pick in the draft. And he is, I don't know if you can criticize Ayton for much. He's played very well in these playoffs. They don't have a center. Now they'll bring in Saric to almost play that center position with their second unit, but they only really have one that they play, again, in crunch time, because I feel like we can't get too consumed over who's the 9th and the 10th and the 11th man, because in reality, they're not going to be playing in the playoffs. And then the Clippers have an interesting situation where they play, this is just in the last game against the Suns in game 1, they play a combined 31 minutes between DeMarcus Cousins and Ivica Zubac, and neither of them break 20 minutes. So it's interesting there, and again, neither of them start either. So it's interesting there to kind of see, what is the true value of centers at this point? Because it seems like they come under such criticism, and I'm not saying that criticism is going to mean that just because they're criticized, you can't pay them in the offseason. But let's look at some recent NBA champion centers. And let's just look to see who they are. The Bucks could go win the championship. Their center is Brook Lopez, right? The Clippers could go win the championship, and they don't even have a center. It's Morris or Batum. Let's just really quickly go through the years here. In the last 10 years, we're talking about Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee. We're talking about Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, Zaza Pachulia, another JaVale McGee appearance for 2 straight years with the Golden State Warriors. Tristan Thompson, Andrew Bogut, Maurice Spates. Now, we do get the year of Tim Duncan and Thiago Splitter. So, 1 out of the 7 years here. Chris Bosh plays the center position a little bit for Miami. But then their first go around, the first time they win against the Thunder, is more Joel Anthony playing. And then they Bosh was in between both the 4 and the 5. And then Dallas, the first time they won their championship and they beat Miami, they start Tyson Chandler and Brendan Hayward. So what is the value of paying these guys? I mean, it's interesting to me. I'm not going to sit here and say these 3 guys on the screen aren't good, but it is a situation where I feel like as a league, the NBA is going to, sooner rather than later. I think we need to prepare ourselves for it because of what we're seeing in the playoffs now. There's not going to be too many center rotations in my opinion. I mean, if you have a good center, awesome, start him. But if you don't, bring him off the bench. I think we're going to see the 5 out a lot more. I mean, we saw it with Brooklyn. Their center was Blake Griffin, right? Utah in their series, I mean, they have Favors, who historically has played the 4, but I think he's now really officially a 5. I mean, he was just getting lit up in coming off the bench. And the Nuggets don't have really a backup center that they play instead of Jokic because Jokic takes up 2 minutes. So it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Feel free to comment, and we'll have some back and forth and see what everybody else thinks. I just feel like sooner or later there's going to, unless we can, find some kind of diamonds in the rough in a way of these centers that can really do everything. And I mean everything, like defend and shoot the 3. I mean, I think the closest thing we're seeing that to is Embiid, but it will be interesting to see if people abandon the center position entirely, especially the way that that centers just aren't as highly coveted. I mean, a guy who could have been, a top 10 pick 10 years ago is he even considered for the first round of the draft? It's interesting. I don't know if teams value it. We'll definitely kind of see how these playoffs go out, but it's just a thought. Feel free. What do you guys feel? Do you feel like centers are still important in today's game, or do you feel like they're not as important, or do you feel like they're not important at all, or it just kind of depends? Because again, recent championship teams tell us that your center doesn't necessarily need to be the highest paid player, or the guy who has the ball in his hands all the time, or the guy who is the best defensive player. It's interesting. So let me know what you guys think. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and y'all have a good day.